National Gun Violence Survivors Week starts this Saturday. It's a symbolic week designed to point out that America's current death rate is as much as 10 times higher than other high-income countries like Canada, France, Finland, and Australia. And on average, more Americans are killed with guns by early February than in our peer countries over an entire year, according to data from the organization Everytown For Gun Safety. But for my next guest, Saturday is not just the start of Gun Violence Survivors Week. The day will also mark 10 years since her abusive husband shot her and their 17-year-old daughter, Olivia, and later turned the gun on himself. Jody Marchand was the only survivor, and on Saturday she'll be the keynote speaker as Olivia and many other victims of gun violence will be honored by the Massachusetts chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. Jody joins me now. Jody, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So at this event, you will be talking about your personal journey from experiencing a loss that is unimaginable for a lot of people, including me, into this life of activism that you have built over the last decade. Can you give me and the audience a preview of what you're going to be saying?
Well, yeah, I talk about what happened, the night it happened, and then I will talk about signs of emotional abuse, because domestic violence, if you figure a pie, and in the center of the pie is power and control. And then there's slices of that pie, which can be physical abuse, emotional, financial. There's many signs of abuse. And so I give some examples, and I talk about, because the fact I think he knew I was finally done after 30 years.
You were on the verge of leaving him when this happened?
Pardon me?
You were on the verge of leaving?
Well, we had grown apart. He was, we had grown apart, and he knew it. And 2 weeks prior, I had needed him to sign an equity line for me because I had been a loan officer, and I had a lot of debt because interest rates had gone up. Mm-hmm. And I needed him to sign an equity. He didn't want to sign it, and I begged him, and he wouldn't go, And finally I stood up and I said I want a divorce. And the relief I felt was unimaginable. But then he said, okay, I'll go sign. And I think the fact he knew he was losing control and he wasn't going to have it.
You talk about the different types of abuse that people can experience and engage in. With your husband and you, was it exclusively emotional abuse? And I don't mean to sound like I'm minimizing it. Or was there also a physical abuse component as well?
No, I mean, the physical abuse, he had guns. He was a hunter. And so there were guns in the house. Didn't even faze me. It was his hobby. Yeah. So,
and how about with your daughter? Had he been emotionally abusive with her as well? Or was this something sort of, he took out his anger at you by doing this new thing?
Here's the thing. There was emotional abuse, and it's, as I said, it's all those signs. And believe me, I could talk for an hour. And in times, I talked to some students at the school she was in. And it's so important, especially for kids, to hear the signs. And my daughter, I would say, yes, my husband, she was a volleyball player. He would go to games as long as they were in the vicinity of where we lived. Mm-hmm. So what kind of dad is that? It's all about him. It's narcissism. But anyway, so she then, I believe, had a boyfriend that turned out to be a bit controlling from stories I've heard. And she also, there was a semester she was late to school 18 times, which was so not my daughter. What she was doing is she was going to her boyfriend's house to make sure he was ready for school, because he was, he was a slacker in his senior year of high school.
Are there policy changes? This event that you're going to be headlining is part of this bigger push for policy changes involving gun control. If certain laws had been on the books in Massachusetts involving gun ownership, parental behavior, individual behavior, would they have made a difference, or is what happened to you and your daughter a tragedy that could not have been controlled by lawmaking?
What I believe is that, if he had to have been mentally tested or whatever you want to call that, had been
some sort of screening,
some
establishing
sort
mental
of
fitness.
screening is a great word, but I think he might have passed. So I don't know the answer to that, other than what I do know is that he had hunting rifles, and but what I gave him one year for Christmas was a Glock. Not knowing, I asked him. I was buying it through a friend of his, and I said, "Well, what is a Glock? What kind of gun is that?" "Well, it's one I'll do target practicing, and maybe," I think he might have mentioned hunting ducks or turkeys or birds, I don't know. And so the thing is, what I found out later is a Glock is a powerful firearm. It's been used by the military, by police officers. Why? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How would I have known that?
And we should mention, in this twist that makes what you've experienced even more horrible, the gun that you gave him as a gift was actually the gun that he used to kill
murder
your
my
daughter
daughter.
and to try to kill you.
To try to kill me. And that's why I have the guilt forever that I gave him that gun. But as I said, having guns in the house, I just figured it was just another,
Yeah.
hobby.
I can see why. I can see why.
Type of thing.
I can imagine a gun rights proponent watching this interview or listening to you talk on February 1st and saying, "I'm so sorry about what happened to your daughter, but with all due respect, you gave your husband that gun. There were other guns in the house. There may have been signs of abusive tendencies that you missed, that you recognize in retrospect. Why should my rights as a responsible gun owner potentially be infringed by this horrible thing that happened to you?" What would your answer be?
My thought is that the group Moms Demand Action, they know it's a right to bear arms. We know that. But however, as we've said, in the numbers of deaths by guns in our country is insane. There needs to be more people, how are these kids getting guns? How are some of these adults that are having these moments enraged with guns? They're either, how are they getting them? And if they're not being registered, they need to be registered, and there needs to be some sort of background check. There needs to be something done. Our country is a mess.
I think this is my last question for you. We've got about a minute left. In the time that you have been working on this issue, responding to your personal loss, have you become more or less optimistic about the possibility of some kind of meaningful change in the way we do business here in the U.S.?
Yes, I think I'm optimistic about that. And the reason is because they say, like the NRA doesn't have the control it had at one time. I believe that Everytown For Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action is very, very powerful group. And it's, I believe, I can't imagine it won't even get bigger because people are afraid. They're afraid to let their kids go to school. You're afraid to let your kids go play in the neighborhood as we did, as I did.
Mm-hmm. No, me too.
When I was a kid,
and I hate hearing about my kids doing active shooter drills.
Pardon me?
I hate hearing about my kids doing active shooter drills, which is not something that we experience.
Isn't it? It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Something needs to be done. Absolutely.
All right, Jody Marchand, we have to leave it there. Thank you for making time to come and
Thank
talk
you
with us.
so much
and
for the
I'm
time.
so sorry for
Thank
your
you.
loss.
I appreciate that.
For more information on Saturday's event, head to momsdemandaction.org/events. And for more information on the organization Jody created in her daughter Olivia's honor, visit liveforlive.org. That's LIVE for LIV.org.